you didn't see it coming like a storm. There was no slammed door, no final argument, no dramatic speech sharpened into a weapon, just a slow change in the air, a quiet that felt different, a message left unanswered, a warmth that stopped reaching. And somehow, that silence hurt more than cruelty ever could. Because when an avoidant is used to distance, they know how to survive anger. They know how to rationalize conflict. They know how to make your tears feel too much, your needs feel heavy, your love feel like pressure. But the one thing they are rarely prepared for is your peace. Especially when you are the one who always stayed. The one who understood the mixed signals, the one who translated coldness into fear, the one who kept seeing the wounded child inside the grown adult who kept pulling away, the one who gave softness to someone who only knew how to brace. A super empath doesn't leave like everyone else. They don't leave because they stopped loving. They leave because love finally stopped betraying itself. And that is what breaks the avoidant. Not because they are monsters, not because they never cared, but because your silent goodbye forces them to feel what they spent so long outrunning. And that truth is brutal. The avoidant was often never changed by your begging, your explaining, your availability, your forgiveness, or your endless emotional labor. In fact, those things sometimes gave them exactly what their nervous system secretly depended on, the certainty that no matter how distant they became, you would still be there to keep the bond alive for both of you. That's the part no one wants to admit. Sometimes your loyalty became the cushion beneath their avoidance. Sometimes your empathy became the hiding place for their emotional immaturity. Sometimes, the more beautifully you understood them, the less urgently they had to understand themselves. So when you finally go silent, it isn't just your absence they feel. It is the collapse of the emotional system they were unconsciously leaning on. And if you've ever loved an avoidant, you know how confusing that system is. One day they look at you like you are home. The next, they move like your love has become a fire too close to their skin. They miss you, then mute you. They want closeness, then resent the closeness once it arrives. They reach, then recoil. They promise, then disappear into themselves. It looks like indifference from the outside, but indifference is often the costume. Underneath it, something far more chaotic is happening. Avoidant attachment is not a lack of feeling. It is often a fear of feeling with no safe place to put it. Their nervous system learned long ago that closeness can become engulfment, that dependence can become danger, that being needed can feel like being trapped. So the moment intimacy stops being fantasy and starts becoming real, the body reacts. The amygdala begins reading emotional closeness as a threat. Cortisol rises. The nervous system shifts into self-protection. Distance starts to feel like relief. Not because you are wrong for loving, not because they don't care, but because care itself can overload a system trained to survive by shutting down. That's why they can miss you and still avoid you, think about you and still not text you, love you and still act cold, cry in private and look detached in public. Contradiction is their native language. And for a super empath, that contradiction becomes a prison. Because you can feel what they cannot say. You sense the tenderness in the cracks. You notice the hesitation in their voice, the flicker in their eyes, the way their distance always feels slightly haunted. So you keep holding on, not to what they are giving, but to what you can feel they might be capable of giving if only they felt safe enough. That is where many empaths lose years of their lives. Not in bad love, in almost love. In emotionally unavailable love with a pulse. In love that keeps whispering, "Stay a little longer. You're getting closer." when really, you're just getting more entangled in a pattern built to keep you starving. Because the painful truth is this: when you become the permanent interpreter of someone else's silence, you slowly abandon your own reality. You start normalizing crumbs because you can taste the meal hidden behind them. You start calling inconsistency wounds. You start calling neglect fear. You start calling your loneliness patience. And maybe the cruelest part of all is that your empathy is real. Your understanding is real. You are not imagining the conflict inside them. But understanding someone's pain does not heal the pain they weaponize against intimacy. And loving someone deeply does not give you the power to regulate a nervous system that still experiences love as loss of control. At some point, your soul gets tired. Not dramatic, not loud, just tired. Tired of reading between lines that should have become actions. Tired of carrying conversations on your back. Tired of swallowing your needs so they don't feel crowded. Tired of pretending their distance doesn't cut you open. Tired of waiting for emotional availability to arrive in someone who keeps treating it like a threat. And when a super empath reaches that point, something sacred shifts. They stop trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding closeness. They stop proving their value through endurance. They stop translating their pain into compassion before they even let themselves feel it. They stop performing emotional CPR on a connection that only survives when they are the one breathing for two. This is where the silence begins. And silence in this dynamic is not passive. It is not weakness. It is not punishment. It is not a game. It is the first moment the empath stops feeding the pattern. That is the core concept the avoidant can't tolerate for long. True, non-reactive silence. Not angry silence meant to provoke. Not strategic silence meant to bait a message. Not silence with one eye still on the phone, hoping they finally panic. Real silence. The kind that happens when your nervous system no longer volunteers to dance with their confusion. The kind that says, without saying anything, "I see you clearly now, and I will no longer disappear inside your limits." The kind that doesn't chase closure because it has become closure. That kind of silence is devastating to an avoidant for a reason. Because for once, there is no emotional smokescreen. No pleading they can label as pressure. No confrontation they can frame as drama. No intense reaction they can use to justify withdrawal. No over-explaining to help them avoid their own internal confrontation. Just your absence. Just the stillness. Just the space where your devotion used to be. And suddenly, what once felt suffocating becomes irreplaceable. This is when the psychology flips. When you were always available, their nervous system could keep closeness at arm's length because the bond felt guaranteed. There was always tomorrow, always another chance, always another message they could respond to later. Your presence was emotionally expensive, yes, but it was also familiar, predictable, accessible. Once that disappears, dopamine enters the picture differently. The brain becomes fixated on what is no longer obtainable. What felt stable becomes uncertain. What was background becomes foreground. And uncertainty is an obsession machine. Now they wonder, why are you really gone? Why aren't you reaching? Why does your silence feel heavier than all the words you used to say? Why does the room feel wrong now that your energy is no longer filling it? They start checking. Your profile, old messages, the last thing you said, the tone they ignored, the goodbye hidden inside your final calmness. And because avoidants often suppress emotion until distance makes it safe to feel, your silence creates the exact conditions that let their buried attachment rise.
When you were close, they deactivated. When you are gone, they activate. That is the paradox. Now the memories come back with teeth. The way you listened without interrupting. The way your face softened when they were guarded. The way you could feel pain they tried to disguise as sarcasm, fatigue, busyness, independence. The way you loved them without making them earn humanity. And most of all, they feel the shock of your withdrawal not as rejection, but as reality. Because your silence tells them something no argument ever could. You finally accepted what they were showing you. That is unbearable. Not just because they miss you, but because they can no longer hide behind the fantasy that your love would wait forever while they figured themselves out in comfort. Now they feel the cost. They feel the loss of the one person who saw through the armor and still stayed. They feel the emptiness of winning space, but losing connection. They feel the emotional echo of every delayed reply, every half-love, every retreat, every time they chose self-protection over intimacy and assumed the bond would survive it. And this is when they may start chasing. Not always loudly. Avoidants rarely chase in ways that look vulnerable at first. Sometimes it is a casual message that pretends nothing happened. Sometimes it is a meme, a breadcrumb, a strangely timed, hope you're doing well. Sometimes it is watching your stories again, liking something old, creating small openings that let them test whether the bridge still exists. But beneath those tiny gestures is a storm. Because now they are the one feeling unstable. They are the one reading silence. They are the one waiting. They are the one sensing the nervous, acidic pull of uncertainty. And what they often hate most is not losing control of you. It's losing the version of themselves that only existed in your presence. You made them feel more human than they knew how to be alone. That's why your goodbye lingers inside them long after you leave. Not because you were perfect, not because they suddenly become transformed overnight, but because your departure removes the emotional mirror they depended on without understanding. In your presence, they could borrow warmth, borrow softness, borrow regulation, borrow meaning. In your absence, they have to face what is underneath the detachment. And what's underneath is often grief. Grief for the love they couldn't receive without flinching. Grief for the tenderness they mistrusted. Grief for the intimacy they wanted, then sabotaged. Grief for the person who finally stopped arguing with reality. But here is the warning. This is the moment many empaths break their own transformation. Because the second the avoidant circles back, the old wound lights up. Hope returns wearing their face. You tell yourself, see, they did care. And maybe they did. Maybe they do. But caring is not the same as capacity. Missing you is not the same as being able to hold you. Feeling pain is not the same as being willing to change the pattern that created it. If you go back too soon, if you mistake their discomfort for growth, if you let their sudden attention erase the truth of what you lived through, the cycle restarts with even deeper hooks. Because now your nervous system has proof that disappearing is what makes them feel, and you can become addicted to that distorted power. Leave, they return. Open, they retreat. Ache, repeat. That is not love. That is intermittent reinforcement with a spiritual costume. And it can wire your brain to confuse longing with destiny. So if they come back, the question is not, do they miss me? The real question is, have they become emotionally safer? Or am I just watching their fear of loss speak for a moment? Because an avoidant in panic can sound sincere. An avoidant in loneliness can sound awakened. An avoidant in regret can sound deep. But transformation is not in what they feel when abandoned. It is in what they build when closeness returns.
Can they stay open when intimacy stops being theoretical? Can they remain present when your needs enter the room? Can they tolerate the vulnerability of mutual love without turning cold, confused, or cruel? Can they take responsibility without needing you to make their shame smaller? Can they meet you where you live, not just call for you from the edge of their fear? That is the standard now. Not chemistry, not history, not potential, not pain. Standards. And if they cannot meet that standard, your silence must remain sacred. Because your silent goodbye was never just about leaving them. It was about returning to yourself. Returning to the version of you that does not need to earn reciprocity through suffering. Returning to a body that no longer mistakes anxiety for connection. Returning to a heart that can finally tell the difference between being chosen and being used as emotional shelter. Returning to self-respect so deep that even love is not allowed to negotiate it. This is the identity shift. You are not powerful because you made an avoidant miss you. You are powerful because you stopped abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You are powerful because you finally understood that your empathy is not a passport to mistreatment.
Your patience is not an invitation for neglect. Your insight is not a contract to stay where you are slowly being emptied. You are powerful because you let the silence say what your wounded self kept trying to soften. I cannot keep loving you at the cost of me. That sentence changes everything. Because once a super empath truly learns that, they become unreachable in the old way. Not cold, not bitter, not closed, just unavailable for emotional half-light. They no longer chase people who confuse depth with danger. They no longer shrink their needs into something manageable. They no longer romanticize emotional scarcity. They no longer call survival love. And strangely, this is the moment they become magnetic in a completely different way. Not because they are performing detachment, but because they are no longer leaking desperation. They are no longer trying to convince anyone to choose them. They are no longer bending themselves into a shape that feels less threatening to the emotionally unavailable. They become still, clear, deep-rooted. They stop asking, "How do I make them realize my worth?" and start living as if their worth was never up for debate. That energy cannot be manipulated the same way. That energy cannot be breadcrumbed for long. That energy does not tremble every time someone returns with unfinished feelings and familiar eyes. And yes, that may break the avoidant. Your silence may haunt them. Your absence may teach them more than your devotion ever could. Your goodbye may become the wound that finally forces them to confront themselves. But that is no longer your assignment. You are not here to be the lesson. You are not here to be the rehab center for someone afraid of intimacy. You are not here to keep proving that your love is rare enough to deserve basic emotional safety. You are here to become someone who no longer begs reality to be different. Someone who sees clearly, feels deeply, loves fully, and still walks away when love asks for self-betrayal. So if you are in that silence now, if your hands still ache to reach out, if part of you still wants to explain one more time, listen carefully. They may miss you. They may think about you at night. They may replay your tenderness when the world feels cold. They may finally understand your value in the emptiness you left behind. But your healing cannot be built on whether they break. It must be built on the fact that you finally stopped breaking for them. That is the real ending, and the real beginning. Not their obsession, not their return, not their regret. Yours. The moment you no longer need to be chosen by someone who is only able to love you in fragments. The moment you choose the full weight of your own soul instead. And when that happens, your goodbye is no longer a loss. It becomes a threshold. It becomes the last time you confuse being deeply felt with being deeply held. It becomes the moment your nervous system learns a new truth. Love does not have to hurt to feel real. Silence does not mean abandonment. And leaving what drains you is not cruel. It is sacred. So let them feel the silence. But more importantly, let yourself feel what rises after it. The grief, the withdrawal, the emptiness, the shaking, the space. Stay there. Because on the other side of that silence is not just freedom from them. It is freedom from the version of you that kept calling pain love because it was familiar. And once you meet the self waiting there, calm, clear, unhooked, you will understand something that changes your entire life. The most devastating thing a super empath can do to an avoidant is not make them jealous, or chase, or panic. It is to become whole without them.